remember that you am too. It's a different world. It's a different world. It's a different world. It's a different than where you come from. Ooh, than where you come from.
First, you will read the transcript. As you read through, you will think about and create codes that occur in the transcript based upon the overarching research questions. There are various ways to approach coding. You can code the transcript by hand or by using a coding software such as Vivo. Personally, I choose to code by hand by underlining the transcript with a highlighter and writing the overall code in the margins. This duty will be performed throughout the transcript until you feel the transcript is thematically coded in relationship to the research questions.
The consensus building exercise is an opportunity for research teams to come together and essentially talk through the data analysis process. So let's say your research team has been working on data analysis for a qual project, and you each have a set of transcripts finished, and more interviews are scheduled for a week or two down the road. Your team should get together to have a conversation about the coding process each individual has gone through and collectively decide on what direction the data is taking you. If new questions for future interviews should be added to the protocol, now is the time to talk through that philosophy and ultimately decide on the final code you would like to use moving forward, just to create a base level of consistency. This does not mean that once these codes are decided upon that new codes can emerge as the research and data analysis continues. You'll ultimately collaborate again to discuss your transcripts and think about the overlap, how the codes you found relate to the research questions, and clear up any misunderstandings. So let's take a look at the two transcripts. The team in this project individually coded data and came up with different codes when prompted with the same research question. For example, in transcript A, we see codes of institutional burden, federal and state support, endowment and competition, internal-external communication, telling one story and narrative, etc. But in transcript B, we see three main codes of contributions of HBCUs, one that says finances, endowments, fundraising, and connections to the community. After meeting to talk through the thought process behind the codes, interrogating those differences, making sure they align with the direction of the research questions, we will consolidate these codes once you come to a consensus. So for example, we see in transcript A, codes referring to community partnerships, but in transcript B, the code is connections to the community. This code ultimately became community partnership after the consensus building exercises. The code funding was consolidated with the code finances, endowments, and fundraising, and so on. So the research team decided on the final codes based on this consensus building exercise and consolidated them into contributions of HBCUs, finances, and community partnerships as a final consensus building exercise and the final product of the coding process.
So, how to create a code book. Code books come in many forms. There are several different elements that go into a code book, with the most important being code and description. Here is an example of a code book that has type, code words, parent codes, in the form of a specific abbreviation and definition on the right side of the document. On the left is the document with the frequency of codes. Our document uses code and descriptions. During the coding process, after you have found a particular code, you would have wrote a brief memo on what you were thinking, and that memo will help in creating the description of the code. For example, we use the code funding, which references related to the financial challenges with endowment, federal, state, and government support, or alumni involvement, which describes the function and role of alumni in both the community, partnership, and in relations to financial challenges facing the institution.
After you and your research team create a final consensus on the codes, you will begin the code reporting process. Once you decide on your final codes, you will create themes from the data. Themes are typically longer in nature than codes, and they represent a higher level of categorization than codes. The themes identify major elements that are woven throughout the data. Usually, a researcher will report anywhere from 3 to 5 themes. For the purpose of our example, the researchers prior to the code reporting process created a final consensus document. The final codes were contribution of HBCUs, funding, community partnerships, and alumni involvement. From this list of codes, the next step would be to understand your overarching research question and to keep it in mind as you reread through the quotes within the consensus codes. Furthermore, in order to create themes, think about the conceptual lens and or theoretical framework you will use to interrogate the data with the question that you have. For example, for the transcript in our example, the overarching research questions were: why do people question the relevance of HBCUs? What can HBCUs do to advocate for themselves? And also, what is the value of HBCUs? After you understand the research question, you will comb through the codes and generate themes across the codes. From the consensus codes, look through each of them and pull quotes that you believe best represent the themes that you generated. Here's a list of consensus codes. Remember, our overarching research questions are: why do people question the relevance of HBCUs? What can HBCUs do to advocate for themselves? And also, what is the value of HBCUs? So, with these questions in mind and the codes in front of you, start to read through the quotes within each code. Read through all of the quotes within the codes and start to think about where there are similarities across the data. Once you note these similarities, these are your themes. To create the code report, list each theme, thoroughly describe the theme, and then list the quotes that you have tied to each theme. Here's an example of one theme that we pulled from the data analysis process. The theme is HBCUs as essential to the fabric of higher education. As you can see, we listed the theme and put a description of the theme below it. Below the description, we list all of the quotes that we think best represent the theme, HBCUs as essential to the fabric of higher education.